Right. If we could have the first picture. Wow, it's nice to see so many wonderful people here. And we're going to have such a this is such a wonderful story. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And we'll all enjoy it. Churchill's capture and escape during the Anglo-Boer War. News filtered down, came in drips and drabs. Churchill had been captured on the 15th of November, 1899. Churchill's book, The River Wars, was doing the circulation and everybody was following him. They were all anxious to see what he was up to. He was really a man of the moment, as you will see. But there was much debate. If he'd been captured, would they shoot him? Most didn't think so. Officially, he was a journalist. Hey, Chris, you get away with the things, you journalist guy. Officially, he was a journalist, but a lot of them remember him as a soldier. In India, he was a soldier, and a jolly good soldier. And he wouldn't be the first to have underestimated the Boers and got himself captured. He landed in Cape Town on the 30th of October, 1899. On the Donata Castle. Do you remember those castle ships? Wonderful. On the Donata Castle, and on the same ship was Buller. Buller, who'd come to he was the hero. He was going to come and change, and he was going to be in Pretoria by February. And so he was on the same ship. And they made friends. They kept up their friendship. But he arrived in Cape Town. Churchill, he arrived in Cape Town, and on the same day he sent off a dispatch to his office of 2,000 words to his paper, and then he took the train to Natal. His biggest worry was that he was going to miss all the fun. He predicted that the British Army would be in Pretoria by February. He came with letters from Chamberlain to Sir Alfred Milner, contacts with Rhodes, with Eckstein, with Beit. And that didn't stop him from jumping on a train to Durban. Can we have the next picture? Next picture. Now, this is you're going to love this. This is a plan with all the railway lines in South Africa at the time. And he jumped on a train and he went from Cape Town to Durban. Don't know how the hell he did it, because there's no but he did it, and he beat dear old Bullet to get to Durban. But he had only got he got to Durban, and immediately he transferred and he dashed up to Escort. Escort there. He dashed up to Escort, and there in the station yard, his valet, would you believe, his valet Walden Thomas Walden pitched his bell tent in the station yard of Escort. Because that's where all of the correspondents were allowed to go. They weren't allowed to go any further. And he was kicking his heels in Escort, and he wrote to his paper. This is what I'm not going to read the whole thing he wrote, but I love this bit. I think it very sporting of the Boers to take on the whole British Army. Let us learn our lessons. Always remember, however you are, and however easily you think you can win, there would be no war if the other man didn't think he could do so also. So he sent that off. But sitting around didn't suit him at all. He wanted to tie up with a fellow called Melton Pryor, who was that lovely war artist. Now, I've only got one picture, which I'm going to show you. Hey, we missed a picture. Can we have another picture? Next picture. Oh, this is... I don't know where he is, but this is the station yard in Escort, where he had pitched his tent. And there we go. So Churchill had to, he was looking for Melton Pryor. And so he was holed up here, but he was trying to get guides. He tried to hire guides to take him through the lines so that he could get up to the front. So he got himself a ride on an armored train. Can we have the next picture, please? On an armored train with a friend of his, Captain Helmsley, on a reconnaissance mission to... Sorry, can we have the next picture, please? to Colenso. There he found the trenches dug by the Brits, but Colenso was really a ghost town. And then he dashed off a 600-word letter to the Adjutant General Sir Evelyn Wood, stating that a long and bloody war is before us, and the end is by no means certain, as most people imagine. He was quite happy to criticize the Whitehall and the local generals, which didn't make him very popular at all, as you can believe. He then accepted an invitation from another brother at arms who had been with him in India, Captain Elmay Haldane from the Tyrea expedition in India, to join him on a further reconnaissance. This time a much bigger reconnaissance. They had 3 officers and 117 soldiers, and they set off on the 15th of November. Now, the English were, can I have the next one, please? The English were experimenting with they were experimenting with armored trains, and this is one they called Hairy Mary. They draped ropes all over this to defend them from the Boers bullets. But it looks like a giant Yorkshire Terrier, doesn't it? And this one was if we could go back to the previous one. The previous one you can see is lined with plates. Now this drawing was done by Melton Pryor. He would do these drawings and send them off to London, and they would be in the Sunday Illustrated Times. So that was how they did newspapers in those things. But Churchill said of this, "Nothing looks more formidable than an army train, but nothing is in fact more vulnerable and helpless." They left early in the morning at 5:30. They arrived at Frere Station an hour later. And the first thing they did was they met the Natal police, who told them that there were no Boers around. So Haldane sent a telegram through to Colonel Long back in Durban to say that there were no Boers in sight, and straight got onto their train again, and off they went up to Colenso. Unfortunately, this was a bad mistake, because he'd hardly put down the telegram when he'd received another one that the Boers were stuck in at Chivoli Station. And so, unfortunately, they steamed across if we could have the next one. That is Churchill, ready to go. He doesn't look like a soldier either. It doesn't look like anything, but that's him. So they got on the train, and off they went, and they crossed over the Blowkrans Bridge, and General Botha had blockaded the rail just on the other side in a cutting and they came to a stop, and so that immediately Churchill took control. Even though Haldane was some 10 years his senior, he was quite happy for Churchill to actually help take over control, and they headed back to the bridge. By now, Botha had blocked the other side over here, and he had his men stationed on a promontory, shooting away as they came past. The armored train drew close. The Boers opened fire with small arms, as well as their Maxim and their 2 field guns. Shells were splattering like hail against the steel walls, and the first 2 trucks were derailed. Churchill galvanized the men to go and loosen them up and to undo the rocks that he'd put on the other end. All this time, trying to galvanize the men, then he and Wagner, if we could have a picture of Wagner. Yeah, they are in their train with splattering bullets. Here's Wagner. He was the engine driver. Churchill persuaded him to crash through the back barricade, which they did, but they didn't quite get through. The tender could make it, but the engine couldn't. So they, under fire, they worked away at the blockade. They then got it enough so that the tender could get through. And Churchill convinced Wagner to ram the remainder of the blockade, which they did. And they burst through, and what he did was he arranged so that all the able-bodied men would run next to the train, using the train as a shield, And all those that were shot and wounded, they put in the tender and in the engine. And he reversed back over the top of the bridge, and Churchill stopped him. And he said, "Stop the engine." He said, "Wagner, you go back and get help. I can't leave those poor beggars to their fate." Can you believe? With that, he headed back across the bridge to look for stragglers. He saw some mounted Boers in the distance, and he took cover behind a plate layer's hut. And they started to fire at him. He could feel the bullets sucking the air out around him. And that eventually they lost sight of him, so he decided to creep up out to the top of the cutting onto the level ground at the top. And when he got there, he was going to hide in amongst the trees. And as he got there, he found himself, if we could have the next picture, looking into a Boer rifle. And a Boer with ice blue eyes, looking down at him and asking him to surrender. He thought he would shoot his way through, and he felt, but he'd left his Mauser behind. He lost his Mauser. It was later found by his valet in the engine. So they took him along, and he was captured. They took him off to General Piet-Joubert's tent. And in General Piet-Joubert's tent, there was a meeting going on with Louis Botha and the young Attorney General, Jan Smuts. And they were having a meeting there, and they brought in our friend Churchill. Now, they knew that he may well be a citizen, but they saw him lead the retreat. And they also saw him with a gun. And in their mind, that put him back in the military. So he was arrested. And there was a bit of a going on about him being arrested. And, 40 people claimed that they were the ones that arrested him. And even Botha himself, General Louis Botha, he claimed that he had done it. And Churchill actually agreed with him in his book, My Early Years. He sort of confirms. But there's this little secret I must tell you. Because when Louis Botha went overseas on the mission to create the Union of South Africa, he took his daughter Helen as a hostess, and she and Churchill, they were enamored with one another. So maybe that's why Churchill sort of endorsed his plea. But lots of others thought that it was them. But Veldkornet, with the ice blue eyes, the big moustache, Westhuizen. He was the guy with the rifle. He was the guy who made the arrest. But unfortunately, he could never sort of claim it because he was killed in action 3 months down the line. And so it's a strange thing that he was arrested in this way. And the other thing I wonder, really, almost 10 years, almost to the day, those 3 men, Churchill, Botha, and Smuts, were in Whitehall in London, sorting out the Union of South Africa. What a thing, eh? Can you imagine? I mean, and so, South Africa was formed. Churchill was taken by train from Elandslaagte to Pretoria. And in those days, the Boer War was a chivalrous activity. Everybody were honorable people. And Churchill, he had a guard. He was guarded by a fellow called H.G. Spaarwater. And and he left this letter. If we could have the next picture. Oh, there's Smuts. You can meet him. And there's Botha. See, I'm going too quick. Here's the letter, and it was written in pencil on a piece of scrap paper, and I'll read it to you. I'll read you what it says. The bearer, H.G. Spaarwater, and the British officers captured in the escort armored train. I shall be personally grateful to anyone who may be able to do him any service should he himself be taken prisoner, signed Winston S. Churchill, on the 17th of November. Now, here comes a surprise. Sparvater's granddaughter. Her name is Martha Bam, and Peter Bam is with us tonight, this evening. She has got this piece of paper, this little piece of paper, and isn't it a wonderful thing that they did it? They were honourable sort of guys in those days. So let's get back to our story. Johannesburg was alight with rumour. Churchill has escaped. Everyone had a different slant on it, and everyone had a different idea about it. Thomas Sheffield, who was the editor of the Star and the owner, he said it was just a rumour, because if it had happened, the Boers would have shut down, and there wouldn't have been a rumour. But isn't it funny how those sort of things, how a rumour often turns out to be real? Those mad amalgams of speculation, whispers, embroidery, and plain old chatter actually turns out to be the truth. Can we have the next one? And the final notice was posted in Pretoria, offering a reward of £25 for the Churchill's capture, dead or alive. And the details started to filter down. From the time that Churchill was captured, he objected to being locked up and demanded to be set free. General Jabir was strongly opposed to that, on the grounds that he was dangerous. And they even called in rates. It was also related to our rates. They called in William Rates, he was Secretary of State at the time, and he agreed. And so they kept him locked up, our dear friend Mr. Churchill then. And of course, but they said to him, you know, you can write and do things. And he wrote to everybody. He wrote to the Prince of Wales. He wrote to senators in America, a fellow called Burke Cochrane. He wrote to Louis de Souza, who was the governor of the model school. Can we have the next picture? The model school prison. This was the jail where they were held. And objecting to his imprisonment, he threatened to escape. There were fanciful stories about how messages got in and out of this prison. One of them, there was a guy called Patterson. He used to walk with his dog, and he'd pat his dog in Morse code. Do you believe that? And they got messages. Another one was that there was a fellow who was working in the telegraph office who would sneak things in under the fence at them. And so things were going on, and it was quite a nice sort of thing. Churchill wrote a lot at the time, and he spent lots of time. A fellow called James Cage Hyde was in the same dormitory as them, and the two of them discussed and repeated poetry. And he ended up in a dormitory with Sergeant Major Brocky and Haldane. Now, Haldane had lied about Brocky. Brocky was a sergeant major, and he said he was a lieutenant in order that he could be in the same dormitory, they call it dormitory as Haldane, because he could speak Dutch and the native language. So they thought he would be pretty useful. And they did much plotting. They plotted. They thought, we're going to overthrow all of these guards here, and then we're going to join up with the 2,000 enlisted men in prison at the racecourse in Pretoria, and then we're going to take over Pretoria. But none of that ever came to. And he even sent letters to the commandant, and he left them on his pillow, justifying his escape. And the details were to come through later from Churchill, but edited to being almost not understandable, because he didn't want to implicate people, guards. So Churchill found himself in this prison dormitory with Haldane and Brocky. One day Haldane informed him that they worked on a plan to escape. Churchill let them know that he would love to join them on that. Brocky didn't want it. Brocky thought, this prisoner is of such a high profile that those guys are going to kill themselves to catch him. So no, and he's not very agile. But eventually he sort of convinced them that he would be okay. And then their plan was simple. They had spotted a point on the fence around the prison yard. And there was this particular point where the visibility wasn't so good. And they'd also monitored the sentry who kept guard in and about that point. And what happened is they found that while they were eating, he would lean over and he and his go and talk to his mates next door, I suppose rugby, and about the injustices of having a bomb squad. And they would talk about intelligence stuff, you know. And so they'd watch. And so that's what they were going to do. They were going to jump over and it was just there, and they were going to escape. So they decided on the evening of the 11th of December, 1899, that they should now going to go and escape. So Churchill wrote this letter to the governor of the prison, and this would have been nice. He was a nice guy. They were friends. Old D'Souza, the governor, even used to slip him a bottle of scotch now and again. I mean, now how about that? Hey? Prisoners should have that kind of service. But he crept in because he didn't want, he escaped. So he crept in and put a letter on D'Souza's pillow. And here's the letter. I'm going to read it to you. I do not consider that your government was justified in holding me, and have consequently resolved to escape. The arrangements I have succeeded in making, in conjunction with my friends outside, are such as to give me every confidence. This was a red herring, actually. He didn't want to take. He wanted to take any suspicion from the people in the prison. But I wish, in leaving you thus hastily and unceremoniously, to once more place on record my appreciation of the kindness which has been shown me and the other prisoners by the Commandant and by Dr. Gunning, and my admiration, this is really laying it on, and my admiration of the chivalrous and humane character of the Republican forces. My views on the general question of the war remain unchanged, but I shall retain a feeling of high respect of the several burghers that I have met, and when I reach the British lines, I will set out a truthful and impartial account of my experiences in Pretoria. In conclusion, I desire to express my obligation to you and hope that when this most grievous and unhappy war shall have come to an end, a state of affairs may be created which shall at once support the national pride of the Boers and the security of the British, and put a final stop to the rivalry and enmity of both races, recommending that the circumstances permitted to me, regretting that I have not permitted me to give you a personal farewell, believe me to be yours very faithfully, Winston S. Churchill. Unfortunately, the guard didn't go and talk to his friend that night, and so they were sitting there. They thought they'll do it the next time. So he had to go back and steal his letter back, you see. Now, on the 12th of December, it appeared that they would have to delay their escape again. Brocky accused Haldane. He said, "Go and see," he said, accused him of being afraid. "Go and see for yourself," said Haldane. So Brocky walked along to the latrine, and Churchill went with him, because he also wanted to see. And he peeked around the latrine and noticed that suddenly the sentry was unsighted. So he decided to strike while the iron was hot, and he jumped over the fence, catching his clothes on the decorative finials of the fence of the neighbor's house. And he went and he hid in amongst the flowers. And the neighbor with a guest and his dog came walking out, and the dog came to smell him. But then a cat came and bolted across his path, and the dog ran after the cat and left him. And then they went back in, and he waited because Haldane and Brocky had a compass, and they had a map, and they had the food and the whiskey, I'm sure. And so we waited there. He waited for them, and eventually the dog came to to investigate and complete his investigation. And then his boss called him in, and so there he was. Haldane crept up and said, "You'd better go on your own. We can't come with you." So what he did is he walked off, jumped over the fence, climbed under the neighbour's fence, and walked down Skinner Street, dressed in a brown suit and a hat that had been given to him by Hofmeyer, a bit like every other Pretoria citizen. Then he went and sat on the parapet of the bridge over the Apies River, a slender little streamlet, not the raging torrent that Churchill often mentions, but there he was sitting, thinking, what do you do next? So he headed for the railway line, but he was still unsure which direction to take. He knew he had to move, even if he was going in the wrong direction. But so he then found, and he marched up the railway line, moving away from the lights and the bridges, because he knew that's exactly where the guards would be posted. He came across a little siding called Kuduspoort, and he mapped out a situation at Kuduspoort, a little station with a steep-ish ramp going away from the station on a bend, so that the train line, the engineer, the engine driver, and the guard couldn't see this particular spot for the odd moment. And he decided to wait for a train to come along. Eventually, a train did come along, and he found it was a lot harder than he suspected. And it was only on his third try that he found he grabbed hold of the train and swung himself onto the coupling of the fifth wagon. And he found that he was in a wagon that was filled with empty coal bags. Exhausted, he wriggled into the coal bags, covered himself up, and fell fast asleep, putting distance between himself and his captors at 20 miles an hour. He woke up the next morning and found to his delight that he was traveling towards the rising sun. But he was also concerned because he found himself outside Balmoral station, and he could see things going on there. There was something happening. So he decided to hop off the train, which he did, hurting himself in the process. And he moved quietly to one side. He found a copse of blue gum trees where he went and hid himself, and he drank from a little pool. Don't worry about that lot. And he ate a scare from his stash of chocolate, and he hid all day, thirsty and hungry, but too nervous to approach the native kraal he could see some way off. He could see the railway line, and it was also busy. He decided to wait until nightfall before hopping onto the train, just as he had done the night before. Twilight set in, and he was ready to make his move. Was it his imagination? Suddenly the station seemed busy, but there were no trains. So he decided, so he marched along the railway line towards Witbank. And about midnight, he could see the lights of Witbank in the distance, a coal mining town. But just closer by, there was another light shining, and he thought he'd have to take a chance. And he plucked up courage. So he set off, and as he got closer, he found a house with a light upstairs. He knocked on the door, and a head came through the lighted window and said, "Wie daar?" And he said, and he made up a cock and bull story about falling off a train and being wounded and everything. The guy said, "Wait," and came down. If we could have the next picture. And who came down but John Howard? And he was outside wait, I must get his name right for you. The Algoa Colliery. I haven't got it quite right. Anyway, so he invented this long cock and bull story about being hurt. Something about falling off a tree. "Wait," said John Howard. "Come in." Because what he didn't know is that the court had sent an operative around to all over the show, warning them that he'd escaped, and if they found Churchill, to arrest him immediately. But he was very lucky, because his luck was in. Howard was an Englishman. He was a Freemason, and he worked for a German mine owner who was pro-British and had several Englishmen working for him. One, Daniel Dewsnap from Oldham, who had actually been in the crowd in Oldham 5 months previously and heard Churchill making his spiel for and campaigning for his seat in Parliament. And as the first streaks, and then Howard sat down Churchill and helped him to whiskey and soda from the sideboard, and feeding him all the time, muttering to himself, I wonder what I'm going to say to the Dutch housekeeper. But he took no notice, and eventually he summoned a whole lot of the English miners that he could trust, and they then took, when the light was just beginning to break, the first streaks of dawn started to lighten the sky. They made their way across the mine yard, down to up to the pit head, and then down into the tunnels in the ground. And they ducked into, and dramatically they took him to a part that only they knew. It was a part that was sealed, and the tunnel apparently went down like that, and the bottom of it had filled with water, and it was oily black and reflected the light as you went through, you came up the other side, which was level, and so it was a bit of a hidden place. So they took him to there. They waded through, finding underground water, ramping up. They left Churchill with a bottle of whiskey and some candles and a blanket. This bottle of whiskey thing seems to repeat, eh? And warned him not to move about, because the first shift would be coming on soon. Churchill soon lost his candle, and then found himself in the velvet darkness, but was happy to dream up the future. He would join the army. When he was free, he woke up to a rosy glow. Howard, with two roast chickens and more to drink. And Churchill said, but I lost my candles and a book and cigars. Churchill said, I lost my candles. He said, oh, rats. So they left him with this, and Howard left him, and Churchill was sorting himself out, and a little later, one of the black miners thought he could smell something, and he started to follow the smell of the cigars, and he came across this point where you could see reflected in the water this figure, foreshortened figure, with a light under its face, puffing smoke out of it. And he ran out there shouting, Tokolos, Tokolos, Tokolos. No one went into that part of the mine for another 3 years. That night, Howard joined Churchill and took him for a walk just to relieve his nausea. And he was able to inform his guest that they had captured Churchill. Where? Somewhere near Vereeniging. And they were taking him to Pretoria. The heat was off for a while, certainly until they found that they had the wrong man. And Howard had not been idle. He enlisted the help of a fellow called Charles Burnham, who was a local shopkeeper and a shipping agent. And he was sending a consignment of wool to Lorenz and Marx. And so they rearranged the bales of wool into a little cave, and they stuck Churchill in. Burnham's mother went and prepared a whole lot of takeaway foods, I suppose, and sent them in, and they backed him in, and off he went in a clanking clank and a rattle. Burnham accompanied the train, just in case they pushed him off the main line and left him to rot there. And he had to lie a bit, and he had to bribe a bit, but eventually he got his passenger across the border at the village of Rossano Gracia. Churchill threw off the tarpaulin and crowed and sang his heart out to the heavens, even fired off his revolver in pure joy. There were a few minor hitches after they arrived in Lorenz and Marx, and Burnham, he and Burnham were soon off to the consulate. On the way, they bought him a new outfit and a cowboy hat. They bought him a new outfit and a cowboy hat. And so he went he went off with that, but they had to be discreet, because they had to keep Burnham's identity secret. And Churchill was anxious to do as much mileage as he could out of this escape. So the consul sent a telegram to Howard saying that the goods had arrived. The editor of the Standard and Diggers News of Johannesburg, Churchill wrote that he would be happy to give him details of his escape the next time he was in Pretoria, which he thought would be in 5 weeks' time, in March. Next one. At Lorenz and Marks, Churchill found himself a berth on a small coaster. He's got a nicer hat. This is what they sell. He couldn't go to the crazy shop, you see. The next one, please. So he found himself a berth on the Tugela and arrived on Saturday, the 23rd of December. The harbour was crowded with 20 ships riding at anchor and many more troop ships circling the bay. The skipper of the Tugela found a berth in Durban and found only by triple parking. The Natal Mercury trumpeted his arrival with a headline, "Winston Churchill's escape arrives here today." It had been a black week for the British forces. They had suffered 3 major defeats with staggering losses at Stormberg, at Machersfontein, and a few days before at Colenso. The popular hero, General Buller, was to be replaced with Lord Roberts and later Lord Kitchener. British supporters, can we have the next picture? British supporters needed a morale booster. The Durban population was nearly double its normal size. They all rushed to the docks. Churchill later described it like this: "I reached Durban to find myself a popular hero. I was received as if I'd won a great victory. The harbour was decorated with flags. Bands and crowds thronged the quays. The Admiral, the General, and the Mayor pressed on board to grasp my hand. I was nearly torn to pieces." The next picture, please. Nearly torn to pieces. Where was the torn to pieces went? I was nearly torn to pieces. I've still lost my torn to pieces. Torn to pieces by enthusiastic kindness and whirled along on the shoulders of the crowd. I was carried to the steps of the town hall, where they would not be content until I gave them a speech, which, after becoming reluctant, I was induced to deliver. Can we have the next picture, please? Now, this is the actual monument on the site. In a measured, deliberate, senatorial style that the world would recognize instantly, in years to come, he roused their spirits. "We are in the midst of a fierce battle with a vast military power which is grown up in the heart of this country, which is resolved at all costs to gratify its reckless ambition of beating the British out of South Africa." Never, 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 they shout, never, never. When I see around me such a crowd as this, such determination, with such enthusiasm, I'm satisfied that no matter what the difficulties, no matter what the dangers, and what force they may bring against us, we shall be successful in the end. You will see in this country, the beginning of a new era. Peace and prosperity shall reign, so that the Cape may be, in fact, as well as in name, a Cape of good hope. Yay! They yayed him. Churchill's words were reported in the press with reverence as if they'd been uttered by a commander-in-chief. Ogden's cigarettes even included him in their series of cigarette cards as one of the leading generals of the war. He was rescued by the town commandant, a fellow called Captain Percy, who hosted a press conference. But Churchill did not forget them, all those that helped him. As soon as he got back to England, he ordered 8 gold watches. 8 gold watches. His granddaughter, Celia Sands, has traced those watches. Well, not all of them. She's found 5 of them, and one she found was destroyed in a fire. 2 are missing. She found those watches, and they are all engraved as follows: from Winston Churchill, for their name, from Winston Churchill, in recognition of timely help afforded him in his escape from Pretoria during the South African War on December the 13th, 1899. Churchill wasted no time. He caught a train the same day to Pietermaritzburg, where he was entertained by Sir Walter Healy Hutchinson, the Governor of Natal. The next day by the Prime Minister, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Albert Hine. And there's some doubt where he spent Christmas. But what we do know is it was somewhere near the capture site. Thank you. Have we got any questions? Does anyone want to ask any questions? No questions?
Question time for Rodney. Yeah.
Well, like you might have heard what I said. I said that he stood on a parapet wall of the bridge over a little streamlet, which he referred to as a raging torrent. I left it at that, because I don't believe that thing's ever anything but a dribble. But who knows?
Peter wants to ask.
Yes, Peter. Okay, I dodged that one. I apologize. Don't tell anyone. Yes, sir. No, I don't know if he spoke Dutch. I don't know. Well, it wasn't so fractured. I mean, the governor was de Souza, which was a Portuguese guy, and the next in charge of the prison was a Dr. Gunning, which was an Englishman. We think that they were all Boers and they were all one another. No, there was a bit of a mix. There were a lot of English-speaking people fighting on the Boers front, on the Boer side. Oh, thank you very much.
Any more questions for Rodney? Because Rodney's been competing with the seagulls over here, and the seagulls now are quiet. Mike, yeah?
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so patient. And now let's have something to eat.
No, hold on.
Uh-huh.
I've got a present for Rodney because he beat the seagulls, and Rodney doesn't just talk, Rodney acts the part. So I don't know if it's Winston Churchill that I'm presenting to or Rodney. But on behalf of the Van Plettenberg Historical Society, Rodney, thank you very much. And here's a present which you want to open.
Can I open it?
Yeah.
Hey, shall we?
Yep.
Shall we? Hey, you think a bottle of whiskey? Hey, that would be good, eh, Vaughan? Huh?
Not whiskey.
They got. I think my wife must have made this parcel.
Anybody got a knife?
I don't know.
Oh, now we've got another knife.
Never stops, eh?
Colleen, you really got really wrapped well.
You can tell me about it.
Putting it in.
Who's got a pocket now? Come on, you guys.
Is there a knife there?
There you go.
Oh. Yeah, yeah.
Oi!
Wow, this is very appropriate. It's a buffalo. He wants you to wear the hat. Okay. Oh, yeah. This is for the press.
No, just over there. There we go. Just 2 seconds. Okay. There we go.
1, 2.
One more. Look at me, man.
I'm looking.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you guys, eh?
So this will be a nice Plet Herald. So thank everybody for being here. There's 2 stations where you can collect some a plate and some food, help yourself, and on the side as well. So let's just divide into 2. Thanks a lot for being here. And Rodney, help yourself to something to eat.